Okay, we continue now with the discussion of the Chachakka Sutta, the 6 sets of 6, Sutta number 148 in the Majjhima Nikaya. And in the discussion last week, we saw how the Buddha introduces the sutta by mentioning 6 classes, each of which has 6 items. That is, the 6 internal bases or the sense faculties, the 6 external bases or the sense objects, the 6 types of consciousness, 6 types of contact, 6 types of feeling, and the 6 types of craving. Okay, then after just introducing the 6 sets concisely, then he enumerates the constituents in each of the 6 sets. Okay, now we come to the next part of the sutta with paragraph number 10. Now the Buddha is going to give a kind of, I call it almost a logical demonstration of anatta, to show that all of the items within the 6 sets of 6 are anatta, are not self. Okay, he begins sort of with the conclusion when he says here, if anyone says the I is self, that is not tenable, not acceptable. Okay, the reason is that the I is seen to be subject to rising and falling away, upada and vaya, originating and perishing. Now if the I is identified as self, then it would follow myself arises and falls away. And since it's almost nonsensical to maintain myself arises and falls away, then it would not be acceptable to say that the I is self. Because what lies implicit in the idea of self is the notion of permanence or persistence. For something to be self, it has to be permanent, lasting, stable. If something passes away, then it's impermanent. And if it's impermanent, then one cannot say, this is myself. That is, the Buddha here, he's sort of drawing out the implication, what is implied in the idea of self. Of course, we can use the term self, the notion of self, just as a conventional term, as a convenient device for speaking about myself as distinct from other people. And as long as the word self is used with this understanding that it's just a conventional notion, then it is acceptable. It's quite a valid usage. But the Buddha here is attacking the notion of self that is the basis for clinging. When we cling to our body and mind, what we're clinging to is not some conventional designation, but the idea of something that I really am, something that is my true identity, my true permanent essence, my true essence. And for something to be my true essence, what I really am, then it must be lasting, must be stable. And so the notion of this, or this metaphysical notion of self, or even the psychological self, this permanent being that I am, or this being that I truly am, this essential nature of myself, this is closely tied up with the idea of permanence, and actually it's dependent on the notion of permanence. Since if something is seen to be impermanent, then we don't want to identify with it, because when that thing passes away, then it would mean myself has passed away. And if myself passes away, then we have the problem, and who is here aware that the self has passed away? Then it becomes nonsensical. Okay, so the idea of self gets stamped upon everything that we experience, everything that makes up our experience. And so now the Buddha is going to go through virtually every element of experience, applying the same basic argument in order to demonstrate that these things that we identify with, all of the sankharas or the phenomena, the dhammas of body and mind, are not self. Okay, now the interesting question comes up. The sutta says, the rise and fall of the I are discerned. But how is it discerned, seeing that the I is subject to rise and fall? It seems if we look at ourselves in the mirror, we see that the I is something which is maybe not, we can't say permanent, but it seems to be continuing. Every day we look at ourselves in the mirror and we see basically the same I there. But this notion, this I that we see in the mirror, the eyes of other people that we see with our own eyes, this is really just a kind of appearance which is superimposed upon the actuality of the I. And to understand what is really meant by the I, we have to use a kind of method of analysis in order to dissect the I into its components. Now what we see here, what we touch here, is called in the commentaries, it's called the compounded I. This means the I as a physical sense organ. And this compounded I is made up of this is according to the Abhidhamma way of explanation. It's made up of first the four primary elements. It has a certain amount of hardness, that is the earth element, a certain cohesion or moistness, that is the water element. It maintains a certain degree of temperature, a certain temperature, a degree of bodily heat. That's the heat element. Then there's a certain amount of movement, oscillation taking place. That is the air element. So within this compounded I, we have the four primary elements. Then we have, according to the Abhidhamma, four secondary types of material phenomena. First, there is a color, blue, brown, whatever, white. Then there is a scent, smell. Then there is the taste. Of course, we don't know the taste since we don't eat our eyes, but the taste is there. And then the eighth ingredient is said to be, it's called oja, which means nutritive essence. This is the ability of the eye to serve as food. Though we don't eat our eyes, but we understand if an animal were to eat us, then it would devour the eyes, swallow them, and the eyes would give some kind of nutritive sustenance to the animal.
I hear the phrase telling to the crow is appropriate.
Yeah, the crow eats the eyes, yeah. Okay, then the ninth ingredient is the life faculty of vitality, that which keeps the eye as part of a living organ. Then the 10th ingredient is really what is called, in the technical terminology, this is the Chakku Sutta, which means visual sensitivity, eye sensitivity. This is the element in the eye, the particular material property of the eye, by reason of which we are able to distinguish forms. This is the material, type of material substance in the eye which is sensitive to light and color. Perhaps in modern physiological terms it would correspond to the rods and the cones, at least to the retina. The rods and cones are in the retina, is that correct? Okay, now these 10 material phenomena that make up the compound eye, in the Abhidhamma it's called the eye decad, which means decad is 10. So it's the 10 components of the eye. And the eye faculty, with that part of the eye which functions as the actual sense faculty, this is the eye sensitivity. But all 10 of these components of the eye are always arising and passing away. This is something that one doesn't see with one's gross sense faculties, but it's something that becomes evident when one engages in the practice of mindfulness or insight meditation, vipassana bhavana. Then when the mindfulness is very well developed and the mind becomes very precisely tuned to what is happening in the moment, then if one attends to the eye and focuses upon the eye, one experiences all of the components of the eye as constantly arising and passing away. And so when one sees the arising and passing away of the eye, then one can understand that even that eye faculty, that subtle matter which is sensitive to lights and colors, this too is arising and passing away. Okay, then the same is applied to the to forms. Okay. If anybody says that forms are self, again that could not be accepted, because forms are also arising and falling away. Again, when one looks at a form as a solid object, for example, one looks at this microphone, it seems to be a solid object, to be something lasting. But in fact, these objects that we see are also compounds of different elements, different rupa dhammas, different material phenomena. So the so-called microphone is a compound, again, of the four material elements, the four primary elements. It also has the four secondary elements. Color, the form, smell, taste, though I wouldn't eat it, and it has some kind of nutritive essence, though again nobody will eat it. But if it were to disintegrate, then it would turn into soil, and soil will become nutriment for plants. And so there's something within this metal which has a nourishing quality. Okay, this material object is made up simply of those 8 gross of those 8 material constituents. There's no light faculty in it and no sensitive quality. Well, actually the microphone does have a kind of sensitive quality. The quality of being sensitive to sounds. But it's not a living sensitive quality, it's an electronic sensitive quality. But anyway, one of those ingredients that make up the microphone is called the rupayatana. That is the form base. And that is the only element of the microphone that falls under form here, visible form. And this visible form appears to us to be a kind of solid mass. For example, I see the gray part of the microphone is something extended, stable, apparently lasting through time. And again, this black band, again, looks to be something stable, extended, enduring through time. But when the mind gets very, very sharply tuned through the development of mindfulness and focuses upon visual objects with that very subtle sensitivity that comes through repeated development of mindfulness, then one sees even the visible forms to be in a constant process of arising and passing. Arising and passing. If one keeps the mind in that particular state and focuses just upon the visual field itself is constantly arising and breaking up and passing away, so that everything one sees is disintegrating. And so because there is this disintegration, this arising, passing away, and disintegration, then visible forms, even the form of his body, cannot be identified as self. Okay, next comes I consciousness. I consciousness is the particular function of awareness, or it is that particular type of awareness by which one cognizes, knows, becomes aware of a visible form. This I consciousness arises based on the I as its faculty, and based on form as its object. And its function is simply to see a form. As I explained last week, it doesn't know the form. Knowing the form is the function of mano-vijnana, mind consciousness. The I consciousness just takes the colored form that impinges upon the I and makes it available to mind consciousness. It's just a kind of momentary experience of recording, you would say, a visible form, of allowing a visible form to enter the range of mind.
Is there starting with the optic nerve is away? And even if the eye is very there, if the optic nerve is damaged, then you don't get any consciousness.
Then there won't be eye consciousness. In fact, I would say...
You won't even see anything with that eye.
Yeah. I think speaking in modern physiological terms, I think one might even include the optic nerve in the eye faculty. Perhaps even one could take even the part of the brain which is sensitive to which receives the optic data from the optic nerve. Even that could be included in the eye faculty.
If even that is damaged, then you won't see anything.
Then one won't have eye consciousness.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so eye consciousness is subject to arising and passing away. Even when we see an object, then the eye consciousness seems to be lasting for some time. For example, if I'm looking at the clock and I'm well, clock doesn't have enough interest, but if I'm looking out the window at, say, a beautiful scene out the window, maybe a nice view of the lake, then it seems that I'm continuing to look at the lake for some time. But what is actually happening, if one could really sort of tune in to the flow of consciousness, or to the stream of consciousness, one will see many different acts of consciousness, even with the same object, the same sense faculty, arising and passing, arising and passing. And the Abhidhamma gives a rather complicated account of perception, so that even when we seem to be looking at, say, the lake for 30 seconds, what is happening over and over is that at one moment the eye consciousness is arising, that is replaced by another type of consciousness, that by another type of consciousness. Then after a certain number of chittas, the mind stream drops into the subconscious, then comes out again sees the lake, again drops into the unconscious, again comes out. And yet this is happening so quickly that it seems that we're just standing there nonchalantly watching the lake. But actually, many, many times, even in a single second, different types of consciousness are arising, falling away, replaced by other types of consciousness which arise and fall away. Okay, so even though eye consciousness appears to last for some time, if one attends to it closely with mindfulness and attention, with yoniso manasikara, with wise attention, then one sees that the eye consciousness is constantly coming into being and falling away. So for this reason, the eye consciousness cannot be self. Okay, then eye contact. The eye contact is the coming together of the eye consciousness with the object through the sense faculty. And since the three factors that make contact are impermanent, subject to fall away, then eye contact is also impermanent, falling away. So therefore the eye contact cannot be self. Then through eye contact there arises a feeling. Feeling arises along with the eye contact. It is conditioned by the eye contact, and when the eye contact ceases, that feeling falls away. So feeling cannot be self. Then, if anyone says craving is self, then if we examine craving, the craving that arises through the eye for form, this is called rupa tanha, craving for forms. This craving is a momentary event, even though we might be craving for something over and we might seem to be craving for some form for some time. Somebody sees a beautiful picture and is enjoying it, looking at it with some kind of attachment, but that craving is actually a momentary event which arises, passes away, followed by another moment of craving, by another. And so craving too is subject to arising and falling away. And so craving cannot be self. If craving were to be called self, then craving would be, then the self would be subject to arising and falling away. But that is not acceptable.
I think maybe this craving gives rise to the idea, say, in a very strong way.
How is that?
Yeah, because somehow it is lust which has the need for a certain kind of ownership idea, mastership idea, then it becomes a kind of philosophical reaction, asmimana, then ahankara. In that way the I illusion is born. Another aspect of it is the fallacy of mastership over these organs, over these forms, and over these phenomena. This is maybe the most fatal thing, that we get this idea, which the idea of self, that we also have a certain mastership over these things, that they are going according to this form and practice.